Hello, and welcome to the Banff at Altitude podcast, celebrating 50 years of adventure storytelling from the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival. Since its beginning in 1976, the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival has been a gathering place in celebration of all things mountain culture. The yearly festival, hosted at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, fosters an appreciation of the world's mountain places by creating opportunities for people to share and find inspiration in mountain experiences, ideas, and visions. Over the years, we've spoken to hundreds of incredible adventurers who share their spectacular and moving stories. My name is Joanna Croston, and I'm going to be digging through our festival archives to revive some of our favorite presentations from the past to get you stoked for what's to come in 2025, our 50th anniversary. And well, hopefully you'll be stoked for life in general. In continuing with this tradition of sharing stories and connections, we hope this podcast will inspire you to explore, preserve, and enjoy the great outdoors. In 2019, we kicked off the festival with a fabulous panel of folks working to bring diversity to climbing and bridge gaps to create a richer, more welcoming, and inclusive outdoor community where everyone is celebrated. The discussion featured Kai Lightner, Mikhail Martin, Erynne Gilpin, and Bethany Lebewitz. Kai Lightner is a professional rock climber who started the organization Climbing for Change in 2020. Mikhail Martin was one of the founders of Brothers of Climbing. Erynne Gilpin is a Métis educator, filmmaker, and community-based researcher who founded Indigenous Womxn Climb. And Bethany Lebewitz founded the organization Brown Girls Climb. On our main stage in Banff, this panel discussion was hosted by author and journalist James Edward Mills.
I have the pleasure of introducing some amazing people. I'm going to ask them to come on stage with me now. And I really have to express my appreciation for being here tonight. I was originally invited to come to Banff by the previous festival director, Deb Smythe. And I was an aspiring journalist at the time. I had no idea as to what the Banff Film Festival is all about. I showed up once and I've been coming back ever since. And for some reason, they keep asking me back. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate just being able to be on this stage, because when I first started attending this event more than 15 years ago, I was consistently, if not always, the only person of color, or at least one of very few. And despite that fact, I was never made to feel unwelcome. I was never made to feel that I wasn't part of this remarkable community. As an aspiring climber and mountaineer myself, it was something that was actually very natural. And I can't tell you how happy I am to be here tonight to share with you what I imagine will be a very fantastic and exciting conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion in the outdoors. And before I get started, I want to make sure that I properly introduce our panelists in its entirety. First, I'd like to introduce my very good friend, Mikhail Martin, who began his rock climbing gear in the summer of 2009. He was born and raised in New York City. Since then, he's experienced climbing in many communities around the globe. By day, he works as a software engineer. The rest of his time, he runs the organization called Brothers of Climbing, which was created to spark discussions on diversity and rock climbing and create a more diverse climbing community. Mikhail is also the co-founder of the Color the Clabs Climbing Festival, and in the past, Mikhail served as a mentor for high school students at the City Rocks program and now works as a climbing instructor. To my right is Bethany Lebewitz, who is the founder and CEO of Brown Girls Climb, a climbing collective for women and femmes of color that provides accessible and affordable climbing mentorship. Bethany is also the co-founder of the Color the Clab Climbing Festival, which celebrates diversity and culture in climbing. She is a youth climbing instructor with Beast Fingers Climbing Team in Denver, Colorado. Her background in neuroscience and development has driven her to create climbing opportunities that encourage healthy ways to deal with challenges in our lives. Bethany Lebewitz. And I'd like to introduce Erynne Gilpin. She is a Sault Cree Métis community member. She's a PhD candidate, a birth doula, and a rock climber. Her work calls for Indigenous leadership in all spaces of our society, education systems, healthcare practices, and even rock climbing. Erynne Gilpin. And last but by no means least, a young man who I have the pleasure of knowing since the very earliest days of his climbing career, Mr. Kai Lightner, who has earned 12 national climbing titles, including 10 in youth categories and 2 in the adult circuit, 5-time youth world champion medalist. Kai has a passion for indoor competitive climbing, but enjoys pushing the limits through outdoor sport climbing. And in 2013, the year he and I met, Kai reached a new height in outdoor climbing, climbing his first 14A. And since that time, he has climbed numerous 514 grade routes, reaching his new milestone in April of 2015, his ascent of the Era Vela, a 514D in Margalef, Spain. Yay. Mr. Kai Lightner. So tonight we're talking about mentors in the world of climbing, mountaineering, and adventure in general. But before we begin, I want to acknowledge those who came before us. As was acknowledged earlier, we are now in the proudest ancestral land of the Chiniki, the Wesley, and the Bearpaw Stony Dakota First Nation lands of the Buffalo Treaty. I think it's really important that we acknowledge the leaders of our past so that we not only know where we came from, but more importantly, we have a better idea of exactly where we're going. So as an aspiring young climber, I really didn't have very many mentors growing up, people who looked like me, who had similar cultural and social experiences. And through the course of even being at this festival, I didn't see very much representation of people of color. And in the year 2012, I was approached and created a relationship with the National Outdoor Leadership School, also known as NOLS, to do something that had never been done before. We wanted to put the very first team of African-American climbers on the summit of Denali. But at the time, I had no idea who the first African-American was who had done this. And frankly, I wanted to find out. And so one of the very first things I did is what you do is you go online and you Google it, and I couldn't find it. The information just wasn't there. And so I reached out to the general climbing community, and a good friend of mine posted a missive on a couple of the climbing listservs and asked, so who was the first African-American to summit Denali? On 3 separate listservs, the first answer in each one of those was, quote, who cares? You know, so the initial response was trying to figure out how it is that we find ourselves in a situation where a pastime like mountaineering that seems so available and accessible to so many people is quite limited to a very broad cross-section of the American public. So a friend of mine actually happened to find a very obscure reference in the American Alpine Club Journal of the first African-American to summit Denali, a gentleman by the name of Charles Madison Crenshaw. And Charlie Crenshaw was remarkable for a variety of different reasons, the least of which was not the fact that he was a member of the Tuskegee Airmen. He actually served his country as a flight engineer while his brother Milton was a fighter pilot. And having returned from serving his country after the Second World War, he came back to the United States and got a PhD at the University of Chicago in mechanical engineering. But because of the color of his skin, he was told that it would be very unlikely that he would find a job in his chosen profession. Now, disavowing that, he relocated to the Pacific Northwest and got a job for a little company called Boeing, and became an engineer there and actually worked on the Lunar Lander Module program and actually helped to put men on the moon. Wow. In the process of his story, what's especially remarkable is that he became an avid outdoors person. Living in the shadow of the Cascade Range, he was able to spend time in the outdoors. And when the 37th expedition to ascend to the summit of Denali was put together, Charlie Crenshaw was the very first member of the expedition to be invited. Now, what's especially remarkable about his accomplishments is that it doesn't appear in any of the literature. There are no films made, there are no stories told. In fact, the one published account was an article that he wrote himself as an officer of the American Alpine Club. He was actually the treasurer in 1964. Now, again, what's especially remarkable when we tie this story in with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, in his famous I Have a Dream speech, outlines what he hopes America will become, a place where his children will grow up to one day be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. Mm-hmm. And when we stop and we think about what that actually means, we move forward from that Ebony magazine article in 1963. A year later, on June 12, 1964, the Civil Rights Amendment was signed into law. 7 days later, Charles Crenshaw ascended to the highest physical point in North America, a mountain called Denali. Now, when we tell this story, it's important to understand that 6 days earlier, there were places in the United States where Charles Crenshaw couldn't vote. There are places where he couldn't live. There are things that he couldn't do, but one of the things that he aspired to do is to quite literally ascend to the mountaintop. And if you listen to the last line of the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, he says, if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the hiking Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And I think there's something to be said for having a narrative that actually outlines the metaphor of mountaineering as a genuine act of freedom. And for the purposes of this conversation, I think that it's very important that we talk about how all of our panelists today became the beneficiaries of that original dream. One at a time, I'm going to ask them to answer the following question. How did you begin your career in mountaineering, and who were your mentors? We'll start with Mikhail and work our way down.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird. I grew up in New York City. As you know, there are no mountains within view of the city. You have to drive more than 2 hours away, and that's if you can afford to have a car to go climb. You know, for me, I was fortunate enough to have friends who had family that were able to take me rock climbing and bring me to a rock climbing gym. And through that, I was able to discover that thing called rock climbing. And eventually, by going to the rock climbing gyms, I've met more experienced rock climbers who competed in the World Cup, and they were essentially my mentors. They were the ones who brought me outside. They were the ones who taught me how to bring a crash pad, or these are the right kind of rock climbing shoes to wear, and this is the right size you need to wear. Tessa?
Yeah, so I was living in Ecuador for a little while, and I started climbing there, which was really great because my instructors and the guides were all people of color. They were all Latinx, and that was my first exposure. I'm not Ecuadorian, I was just living there, but when I went back to the States, I was like, I'm going to do it. And it's a very different culture here. And I didn't really have anybody that was interested in it. I started climbing about 9 years ago, and so at that time, it was still pretty niche, and it wasn't as popular as it is today. So I actually just went into the gym and was like, hey, I want to climb. How do I do this? What do I need? And so they introduced me to bouldering, and so I bouldered for a long time just by myself and kind of just got to know the sport by myself, and it wasn't really until a few years ago that I was realized how much I wanted and craved community, and how it was very culturally very different, who's in the climbing community, and then what my story was, and how much in common or not in common there was. So that's kind of how Brown Girls Climb got started. I didn't have mentors, so we kind of decided as a collective, we will show up and be our own mentors. And since then, we've been able to connect with Brothers of Climbing and other people in the community that have been kind of able to share their knowledge and stuff.
So I just wanted to introduce myself in my language, which is a part of our protocol. So tan sekua, Erynne Gilpin, nitsahigason, lipa kayate to chin, nia nihiao me chifisqueo. Hi, chimigwach kawiumaske, hi, chimigwach aske, Stony Nakoda, Bears Paw, Wesley, Chineke, Aske, hi, chimigwach geche, manatu, for this opportunity to be here and sit in this really powerful circle. So yeah, I'm Erynne. Hello, everyone. And my story starts with I met a boy. I'm just kidding. He's right there. So I did not know what the heck rock climbing was. I didn't know it was a thing till around a little over 5 years ago. Yeah, I met this really amazing person, and I saw that what he was doing was really strange, and I was like, what are you doing? And my first exposure actually was through his photography. He is now my husband, and his name is Peruzo, if you see his photos. But I saw something that spoke to me in a couple different ways, but his photos really emanated his encounter and his expression with climbing, which was that of embodying and enacting a mindful relationship to land and to his home territories. And so that was something that I wanted to learn more about. I can relate, and I'm sure this is something we will go a little bit further into, is I didn't have anyone. I had Kai. Actually, I was like, Kai Lightner. But other than that, searched and searched and searched as I began to be introduced to rock climbing spaces and communities, and even the consciousness around rock climbing and words like adventure and explore and conquer and things like that, and felt very far away from who I was and my entrance into the sport. And so I believe in a lot of ways in our partnership we actually mentored one another, but the ultimate mentor, and continues to be the ultimate mentor, is actually the land and all of the places that I have the privilege to meet and to climb and to memorize and to self-reflect in. And so that's really kind of the foundation of why I climb and why I hope to continue to create spaces to bring in more Indigenous values into all of our experiences with climbing. So, yeah.
Okay.
Hey. So with my start with climbing, I grew up inner city. I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I'm pretty far away from mountains. Actually, I'm pretty sure if you stood from one side of the city and there weren't any buildings, you could probably see the other side. But I was a really active kid, and I had ADHD, and so I wanted to climb everything, touch everything that I wasn't supposed to. And one day, my mother works as a professor at a college, and she was talking to her boss. And as she was distracted, I decided to climb the 50-foot flagpole that was next to her. And I got to the top, and I was like, I made it. And a lady behind her was like, please come down. And so she got me down, and my mother just apologizes profusely to this lady. And she's like, it's no problem, but he looks like he'd be really good at rock climbing. My mom's like, well, what's that? And so she took out a sticky note, and she wrote down the address of the local climbing gym and said that he should really try to go to this gym and try rock climbing. And so the next day after school, my mother pulled me out from my after-school care program, and she brought me to the climbing gym, and she begged the man at the front desk to please get my ADHD kid to something productive. And for me, it was kind of like a love at first sight moment, because for me, I had tried other sports, I had tried other activities, nothing held my attention. But for some reason, when I was in the climbing gym and I was climbing on the walls, I couldn't think of anything else. And my mother would drop me off at the gym, and for 3 hours straight, I would be trying the hardest thing I could in the gym and sessioning, and it was the only thing that I thought about, and it kind of focused me and grounded me. But growing up where I did, there weren't a lot of climbing communities. Our climbing team was really small. The guy who coached it, who actually is still my coach today, he was in school as well. And the person who I was getting training lessons and programs from lived in Atlanta, Georgia. And so the only way that I could get my training in was if my mother, who already had a full-time 9-to-5 job as a professor, would pick me up from school, drive me to the gym, stand on her feet for 2 to 3 hours and belay me, and also help me interpret my training program, come home and eat dinner. And so we had a really close relationship growing up, because obviously I was 6 years old, like reading a training program was just not an option. And so she helped me through all of that. She holds so many titles in my life. Chauffeur, financial advisor, emotional support system, belayer. And so if I had to say I had a mentor, it definitely would be her. Yeah.
So I don't know how many of you might have seen the Kai's first film, 14C. Anybody? How many of you remember Connie? His mom, Constance Lightner. Yeah. See, and I gotta tell you, one of the things that I love most about Kai's story, when we first met, he was 13 years old.
Yeah.
And he had already been a 4-time national sport climbing champion. And he was on his way towards being a 5th national junior sport climbing champion. And there had yet to be a single word written about him in the popular climbing magazines. And as I'm writing the story, I'm finding more and more about what his experience was. And frankly, his experience was not unlike many of ours. And we literally have people in our immediate circle that love and care for us, that wants the best for us. And Kai's mom, Connie, I think is a really good example of that, because she is as non-outdoorsy a person as you'd ever want to meet in your entire life.
That is so true. Let me tell you, I've been climbing for 14 years, and she has climbed 3 times because I've dared her to. And each time she complains that she might chip her French tips. So.
Right. But she was there for him for the very beginning, you know, and I actually asked her to come to the festival this weekend, and he said, my son's grown, he can go by himself.
That's Mom.
That's so true.
And at the end of the day, what it ultimately boils down to is being able to have, you know, not only visible role models, but also people who will help to nurture and to encourage our interest in these very complex activities. And I'd like to ask the panel, and we don't have to go in order, so please just, you know, let me know what you think about this. How important is it to have visible representation of people who look like you to be part of a community like climbing, mountaineering, or adventure sports in general? Anyone?
Well, for me, I remember growing up, and a common question I always get asked, even like when I had my first interview or whatever, were like, who are the people that you look up to? Like, who do you want to emulate in this sport? And it was a really hard question for me to answer because, I mean, I had climbers that I like admired, like Adam Mandra and Chris Sharma and like legends of the sport. But for me, I didn't see anyone who had a similar background as me or who looked like me who was succeeding at the top level. And even when I first walked into a climbing gym or went to my first competition, I was the only person of color in the room. And so having that, I always had this feeling of self-consciousness, you know. And when I first introduced climbing to my friends and told them what I did, they all looked at me like, we don't do that. That's not our sport. That's not what we do. Pick a normal sport. But I felt like this was something that obviously called to me. And it wasn't like a sport that I haphazardly chose because I was good at it. It was something that connected with me. And so that's why I stuck with it. And so every time I did a milestone or I competed in a competition or I did something, I felt like I was kind of blazing my own path. And so being where I am today, I think that it would have been nice to see people who look like me who are succeeding because it would have given other people a point of reference to be like, okay, like that's something acceptable in our community. That's something that we can do. I mean, we're not limited to the boxes that society puts us in.
Yeah, and to jump on that, I think many of us can agree that seeing is believing. And if you don't see someone that looks like you're doing something, you're going to think that you can't do it. And that's not everybody, because I feel like in many ways I'm like an exception to that, because when I first started rock climbing, I went online, I went on those message boards and I Googled, like, are there black rock climbers? Are they out there? And a lot of the answers were no, they don't exist, or maybe I seen one once at the gym, but that was like just a day pass, so they don't really count. Like you see all of that, and what that did was that really motivated me. I said, okay, I'm going to be the best black rock climber that ever was, and actually I'm just going to make it all the way to the top, be one of the best rock climbers ever. But luckily, I did another Google search, and Kai came up. So he saved me a lot of work in doing that. But because of that, I've been able to focus my energies on different things, like how can we create these spaces for our community to grow and see ourselves in the sport and not have to fit a mold. But how can we exist in these spaces and be ourselves and still enjoy the craft and the sport and the lifestyle and everything?
Yeah, I'll add, like, one, the films have been awesome here. It's been really exciting to see the creativity that's here in Banff. When we're talking about representation and when I think about representation and what it means to me, I think about creativity. I think about what is the vision, you know? What is the dream? Like, where are our hopes and what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? And oftentimes it's like the same idea because it's coming from the same people. And so being able to see and hear sounds and hear different languages and see different skin tones, it really resonates with your body. It resonates with who you are and where you came from, and you feel it. And there are films today that I felt, oh, that's me. That's something in there that I connect with. And so, like, as a creative group here, it's like, who are the people that are sharing those visions? Who are we investing to, like, produce those dreams? And, like, is the representation there? Like, for me, it's really important for us to expand what that looks like and expand who's in the conversation and, like, be able to dream a little bit bigger and a little bit wider, a little bit more colorful. And I get excited about thinking the potential and kind of a little sad that it's so limited, that we're thinking so limited, that we create in such siloed ways, you know? So, I mean, the first time I saw a brown woman sport climb was on Instagram. And like all of you, we've met on Instagram. I haven't met folks, well, now I've met folks in real life, but like 3 years ago, the only woman that I saw on a sport climb, and she was on a 12A topping out, was like on the internet, which is such a powerful place. But it wouldn't be great if that was like in the gym or represented in more places, because now I sport climb, and now I'm an instructor, and there's like all these great things that kind of has been inspired since that little moment. So it can be powerful.
I think the very fact that this is something that we have to consider, or that we do think about and reflect about, demonstrates its significant need for people from different cultural backgrounds and for people of color in something such as rock climbing. So for myself, it was obviously one of the first things I thought are, okay, so, where are the Indigenous climbers, and the Indigenous women climbers? I'm from Treaty 5, I'm from the Pas, Manitoba, and I'm the only one from north of the border on the panel here today, so a lot of what I speak about is definitely located on these territories in Canada or Turtle Island. And I had started my search there, just reaching out, and it was really difficult. I know one Indigenous woman climber in Canada who climbs actively, and other than that, a lot of folks are south of the border, and I had to do a lot of work to connect with people. And because there were so few of us, we not only connected, we have visited each other, we've made time and space to be together, to support one another. Ashley Thompson, who's an Ojibwe climber from Red Lake First Nation, based down in Tucson, and she's a representative of Natives Outdoors. Her and I have kind of entered into this space of Indigenous Women Climb together, where as Indigenous communities, we have very specific values, governance systems, healthcare models, languages that are from direct relationship to land. Our well-being cannot be divorced from the well-being of the land and waters. And I didn't see these values represented in the rock climbing world, in the industry, in these fast-paced movies and films. And it was something that I was craving, because I thought, you know what, from our perspective and our experiences, there's a lot more that we can go deeper. There's a lot more that we can say, that we can explore together in terms of guiding our relationship back to land, not just for our communities, but for all peoples. I see that there's value shifts, in terms of Indigenous leadership is able to lead forward and be able to nourish. And so I was really craving those values in the language used around relating to the land and to the rocks. And so I definitely am thinking about how can the work within Indigenous Women Climb really fill those gaps in terms of the educational pieces around Indigenous governance and Indigenous land protocols and land permissions and relational accountability. What does that mean within climbing in terms of where we are and how we think about our bodies on the land? And so that's what I think in terms of visibility as well and representation.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and like, I don't want this to just be a conversation of just skin color and that sort of thing, because like also when I think representation, like imagine you're brand new into the sport. You're gonna be nervous already. But now imagine going to a place now where you make a joke, people don't get your jokes. So now you just,
That's the thing, yeah.
Right? Like imagine like you go to a place, you go to an event, and like you've never had any of that food before. That's what representation is, like that culture. Imagine going to a place and you've never heard that song before, or maybe you heard a song, you're like, you remember that? And they're like, no. So I think that's what this is really about. When we think representation, it's like who has shared your experience, and not just like your skin tone, but who have lived the things you've lived, and who enjoys the other things that you like.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I really appreciate the fact you both just came off of Color the Crack, which is an event that's held every year that celebrates people of color in rock climbing.
Yeah, Color the Crag is awesome. And I say that not because we're the founders or anything, but I say it because we need the space too, and we are fed off that space. And it was really just like Mikhail and I and a couple of friends of our groups that said, hey, like, we're meeting on Instagram, we should meet in real life because we're all spread out around the country, but collectively there's probably a lot of us. We go out to the middle of nowhere, Alabama, which is also mentioned in MLK Speaks, which is like a very powerful space to be in for Black and Brown Indigenous folks to get out in the middle of nowhere, which can be a very threatening place, and to just relax and enjoy and climb and celebrate each other and and really be able to shed light on some of the things that you talked about, which there are people. We have a history of climbing and mountaineering, and the history of the lands is in Indigenous nations and in areas. And so being able to like talk about that, celebrate it, and highlight it. And this year was our biggest turnout. Yeah, we had over 300 people come out, and it's just been incredible. And it's open to everyone, but we really like are intentional about who's leading and who's like sharing the narrative, what narrative are they telling, and create space for one another. I don't know if you want to say anything else.
I mean, you said a lot of amazing things that, it's one thing to have to go to an event, to speak on a panel, or just go to an event just to enjoy it, And I feel like at Color the Crag, it's an event where, people of color can, not have to worry about, I'm a person of color, they can just worry about the rock climbing and the meeting of their friends and all of that. And the person next to them already just gets it, they have a similar experience. So, when they see that bug crawling somewhere in their tent, and everybody's bugging out, they all just get it, like, we did not grow up together, like together, how we grew up, we did not grow up around these types of bugs, like, that's just what you get at Color the Crag, you get that shared experience that you really can't get at another festival because, just different experiences, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's just a different experience. Yeah, another thing is we focus on leadership. We have so many talented people in our community who have their certification to be instructors. We have professional people doing rock climbing things, and once again, when they're invited to events, it's just like that panel or like that night for diversity.
If they're invited.
If they're invited, and the difference here is like, you know what? We know you're a brown person, or that's fine, but we really want you here because we know you're an expert at this. And this one particular thing, and that's why we want you out here. And we want you to share that with the rest of our community.
The first year that we were planning, we actually had a lot of sponsors that was like, they're calling both of us up, like, where are the black and brown climbers? We need them for ads or whatever. And then, we were able to, like, create, I was surprised, because you never know what's out there. Like, we didn't know. I didn't know, like, BOC existed until we connected. And what we found was like, there's instructors, there's guides, there's athletes. These people have been doing it for years. They own businesses, but they were never invited to other climbing festivals. They were never really highlighted. The same way we see Crenshaw. Those stories were really erased, ignored, or just disregarded because no one cared about them. It's been an awesome platform for people to show what they do, get connected, and for us to celebrate the skills that are already in the community. People think that we're not out there, we haven't been out there, but we have. A lot of people have, and I didn't have mentors when I started, but I have them now. I've learned about Chelsea Griffey, Emily Taylor. I've learned about all these folks. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I had no idea that there was pictures of someone with braids out there, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, I think another point too with having more people of color in these spaces is that not only does it get us used to being in this environment with outdoors itself, but it also helps us to interact better with the people who live there. So a lot of the times when you go into these spaces, there's stigmas on both sides. You have people of color who are hesitant to go to these spaces because typically people who live in rural areas who are further away from big cities and more broader prospects and ideas, it's much easier to fester ideas of hate and have cultures that are a little less removed and a little less known from media. And on the other side, I remember going to the Red for the first time in Kentucky, and I saw Confederate flags, and I saw the first time I was ever called colored in my life. Never heard that word before. But I feel like having more people of color in those spaces and having us interact together allows us to see the other side and allows us to kind of debunk those stereotypes and see that, okay, we have no reason to be scared because these people are nice as well and they're, not out to get us. And on the other side, it's okay, we see people of color, and so our opinions aren't just manufactured from media or from word of mouth. So I think it really helps to bridge that gap.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to point out, I think, Betty, you said a really important word, which is erase. And so that's something I've been thinking about because when I came here, I really tried to educate myself in terms of where am I, what is the history of this place. I called the local nations and I introduced myself and asked for permission to be here and things like that, which is usually a protocol that I do when I travel. And then I began to learn about the local nations and their presence and their ancestral connection to this specific place, which is now known as Banff. And it really brought up the ideas around, I think, myths that people of color and that Indigenous communities, that our communities, for some reason, I don't know why this is out there, but didn't explore, didn't have adventures, didn't fall in love with the land, didn't have ceremonies embedded in relationship to land. And it's only now that we're having these experiences. And there are true reasons, very tangible reasons, that explain this idea of erasure of our bodies from land and from place. Within Canada, I understood here that the nations were removed from these territories in the creation of the provincial park. And then it wasn't until 1957, they were then welcomed back in a very tokenized manner to celebrate their Indian days. And since then, they were unable to practice the same governance on their own territories. And I have a similar experience with my own ceremonial sites, which is now within what's known as Jasper Provincial Park. And so I really think about the ideas of, well, what has caused these ideas of barriers or erasure? They're very specific, structural. Now we have the information, now we have the language in terms of identifying and applying decolonial lenses to these types of reflections and this type of education. And so I think that's another conversation that can definitely not only take place within our education systems, which we're seeing in Canada, you know, within the changes of curriculum or our healthcare systems and our approaches and the ways in which we take care of our bodies, but also within rock climbing, that there's also space for this. There's a word in our language which is tatawao. It's a way to say welcome. It's a welcoming. And essentially it means there's room for you here. And so that's a way that I just try to think about what are the conditions that we need to do, identify, interrogate in order for tatawao to really be the guiding spirit for the spaces that we inhabit together.
Well said. You know, one of the things that is constantly asked, so what's stopping you? You know, I mean, I get that question all the time. I mean, and there was, you know, a period, at least in the United States, where it was prohibited by law for people of color to go different places. There are no more signs that say whites only. You know, there are no prohibitions to prevent us from visiting certain places. We all know why we had prohibitions in the past. What's stopping us now?
Cool. I have a great idea. I think one huge barrier that we don't even realize is a barrier is this concept of we must save these children in the inner cities and rock climbing is going to save them and change their life forever for the better. Now, rock climbing may enrich their life. It may bring something to their life that they didn't have and may bring many benefits to them, but you know, it may not take them out of their situation that's very real because of structures that exist for many different reasons. And because there's so much energy put into the saving, there's less energy putting into investing, right? And when you invest in a community, you know, you bring the funds in and you help them grow, as opposed to just, you know, you have to teach someone how to fish. I forget the saying, but you have to teach someone to fish for, I don't know, you get what I'm saying. But if you teach us how to fish and you invest in us, you know, we have the abilities. We can grow our communities, we can grow our programs ourselves. We don't need, what we need is the investment, as opposed to just being given things to.
Right. And not only investment, but also, you know, the ability to invest yourselves. I mean, Bethany just recently got her single pitch instructor certification from the American Mountain Guides Association. Please.
Yeah.
So what does that allow you to do?
Well, there was a few folks within Brown Girls Climb that wanted to pursue the single pitch instructor, which in the United States is like the lowest level of like, okay, you're on your track to becoming a rock guide or eventually an IFMGA, which is like the world guide, you know, the folks that guide Everest. So like, for us, it's like we want to be able to be that representation and guide others, whether they're women, men, non-binary folks, children, whoever. We want to be able to lead and do that. And we want to do that within Brown Girls Climb. Hopefully one day. But I mean, to our knowledge, at least within the United States, I am one of 8 women of color that have this certification. There's other folks or other women that guide, but specifically with this certification that we know of, there's only 8 women of color, which is like It's kind of crazy, especially when you look at other countries that ecotourism is part of their culture. There's still lower representation among women, but you would think that America would have a higher representation. That's okay, we're here, and we're continuing to do this program. It's a collaborative program with the AMGA, Brown Girls Climb, and Flash Foxy. And that's part of the investment, though, right? It wasn't just like AMGA saying, we're going to do a women's course. It was like, we're going to talk to other experts that reach other communities, and we're going to we're going to design this course together. And so it's not just going to be like, oh, here's a women's space. The culture within this program, the curriculum has to shift in order for us to feel welcome. The guiding industry has barely talked about menstruation, and like that's an issue. That's like a legitimate hygienic issue that we have got to talk about. And so to your point about like, is there, there's not any laws against our safety, that's not necessarily true. It depends on who you are, right? Like if you are an adaptive climber, if you're a trans climber, if you're a queer climber, like depending on where you're at in the country, there may be laws against you being there or that threaten your safety. And then furthermore, like there was a study like last year or 2 years ago by the American Alpine Club, and they've collaborated with a research group, but they did a survey called Safe Outside to look at sexual harassment, sexual assault within the climbing community, just within the climbing community. It's a very niche community. And it was like something like 40 to 50% of people reported sexual assault or sexual harassment. That's like really astounding, not really surprising. But if you're looking at like barriers to get outside, barriers to participate, like barriers to become a guide, like most of the women that I've talked to that are instructors, like AMGA certified instructors, regardless of the level, have experienced that, and it's a problem. And if you're a woman of color, it's even more so.
To expand on you guys' idea, it kind of wraps around the idea that investment is more than just monetary. It also includes knowledge and acceptance. And so knowing that these things exist, and then also knowing that it's okay for you to pursue them. And so a lot of the times we have people of color that are in inner city, and like you touched on, there used to be laws in place, and then even though those laws are lifted, the stigmas are still attached.
Right.
That's why you have stereotypes like black people don't swim, or like other things like that. And so I think a big step has been like just this massive boom of climbing gyms in major inner city areas, because I feel like they're gateways not only to outdoor climbing, but just for people of color to be able to know that they exist and have quick access to be able to participate in them. Because it's one thing to see it on TV, it's another to be able to actually catch a train a few blocks and be able to actually participate in it. And also knowing that there are people of color who do it, and there's nothing prohibiting you from doing so. There's no stigma attached in your own community amongst your peers. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty big.
Yeah, you both definitely brought up my ideas. One of them is that around physical safety. So in Canada, we have something that we call missing and murdered Indigenous women, including girls and trans and queer, non-binary Indigenous folks as well. And this is something that really correlates and looks at violence upon the land. It also includes violence upon our bodies. There's no disconnection to that from an Indigenous lens. And so in terms of my physical body in spaces, it's something that I think about nonstop. And within the rock climbing world, this past year, I had the opportunity to attend the Flash Foxy, which is an all-women's climbing festival. It was the first festival I've ever been to, and it was really amazing. And I'm really grateful to Shalma for the work that she does and for inviting me to speak on the panel there around these issues. And I traveled there with Ashley Thompson, my friend that I mentioned earlier, and we had a road trip together, and we traveled up, and we found our campsite, and we put down tobacco in the ways that we know how in order to present ourselves to the place there and to the ancestors of the place there, and to ask for permission to be there in a good way. And so we really included our protocol and our presence there. We spent the day doing the work that we were there for, and by the end of the day, it was like 1 a.m. or something. We were exhausted, we were tired, and we were so ready just to fall into our tents. And we got back to our little campsite in this very beautiful area, and our tent was thrown out of our sight. There were massive rocks thrown into it. Our stuff was thrown about, and there were 2 big pickup trucks that had just pulled right into our spot. And so we were removed from our campsite, and there were 2 pickup trucks with 2 white men in both of them, and there were beer bottles and stuff just scattered everywhere. First of all, demonstrating a very different relationship to land. And second of all, we weren't in a position as Indigenous women to confront them in ways that we really wanted to. because of all of the different issues around safety that we know and that our communities face and our families face. And so we had no choice but to yell whatever we wanted to yell, to blast our powwow music as loud as we could and leave. And they refused to get out of the trucks. They just pretended like we weren't there. And that was such a traumatizing event in what was an incredibly important moment for me in terms of being at Flash Foxy and feeling so disheartened and so tired around climbing and so tired of just feeling isolated. And I was, for the first time, feeling connected to women of color who were climbing, and it was giving me life that I hadn't realized that I was needing. And then we had this experience that was just very re-traumatizing because it was the removal of Indigenous bodies from land. And so one of the barriers is around physical safety. That really links into intergenerational trauma around this idea of removal or erasure of Indigenous peoples from land and our histories and our governance and our values. And that really leads into my third barrier, which is what you were bringing up, Kai, and that is the lack of decolonial approaches, education, and work being done within rock climbing, whether that's in industry or in non-Indigenous communities themselves. And I run in a group for Indigenous youth to access climbing and to think about themselves in that world and to think about their own cultural values in something such as rock climbing. But it is very difficult to find the spaces where we can negotiate and find a flow between those cultural values when we go into spaces that aren't from us and necessarily for us. And so those would be the barriers as to what's stopping me. It can feel exhausting at times.
I think it's interesting you brought up intergenerational trauma, because I feel as if that's something that's shared amongst a lot of people of color, especially amongst Native Americans, but even amongst like African Americans and whomever groups are represented, because it's like, it's more than just stereotypes and boxes. It's like a history of interaction. And so knowing that feeling of helplessness that's been a generational and having to experience that even today, and that's why a lot of times when we have those interactions where it's based upon things that have happened throughout history. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank all of my panelists today for being with us and sharing their stories and occupying the space with us to hopefully provide a little bit of context for something that many of us deal with every day. So thank you very much. Good night.
Now more than ever, these conversations and actions are so important. For more information, check out these climbers and their organizations online. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time. Join the festivities and help us celebrate 50 years of adventure stories at the heart of the festival here in Banff. Check out our website at banffmountainfestival.ca. This episode was produced by Anik C. and is a production of Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. The theme music was composed by Jacques Blackstone. A special thanks to our audio engineer Ben Ewing and the production team at Banff Centre, as well as the folks from the Paul D. Fleck Library.